ಒಕ್ಕೂಟ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆಯ ಮೇಲೆ ನಂಬಿಕೆ ಇಲ್ಲದ ಆರ್ಎಸ್ಎಸ್ ಹಾಗೂ ಬಿಜೆಪಿ ಕೋಮುವಾದದ ಮೂಲಕ ಜನರಲ್ಲಿ ವಿಭಜಿತ ಭಾವನೆಯನ್ನು ಸೃಷ್ಟಿಸುತ್ತಿದೆ. ಕಳೆದ 10 ವರ್ಷಗಳಿಂದ ವಿಭಿನ್ನವಾಗಿ ಉಡುಪು ಧರಿಸುವ, ವಿಭಿನ್ನ ಆಹಾರ ಸೇವಿಸುವ, ವಿಭಿನ್ನ ಭಾಷೆ ಮಾತನಾಡುವ ಜನರ ವಿರುದ್ಧ ವಿವಿಧ ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಹಿಂಸೆಯ ಬಳಕೆಯಾಗುತ್ತಿದೆ ಎಂದು ಮುಂಬೈನ ಟಾಟಾ ಇನ್ಸ್ಟಿಟ್ಯೂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಸೋಷಿಯಲ್ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ನ ಪ್ರಾಧ್ಯಾಪಕ ಆರ್ ರಾಮ್ಕುಮಾರ್ ಆತಂಕ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಪಡಿಸಿದರು. ಸೆಪ್ಟೆಂಬರ್ 5ರಂದು ಗೌರಿ ಸ್ಮಾರಕ ಟ್ರಸ್ಟ್ ಆಯೋಜಿಸಿದ್ದ ಗೌರಿ ಲಂಕೇಶ್ ನೆನಪು ಗಂಡಾಂತರದಲ್ಲಿ ಗಣರಾಜ್ಯ ವಿಷಯದ ಕುರಿತು ಮಾತನಾಡಿದರು.
It'll be an overstatement if I start remembering Gauri Lankesh after all these speeches and other interventions have already been made. A humanist par excellence, a journalist of enormous courage and conviction, a human rights activist of enormous importance. It was a voice that had to be shut down by the right wing. They were scared of the voice and they did what they do best. Just shut the voice down and not engage or debate with the voice. The result, the outcome or the response will also sometimes be very similar, as we heard in that inspiring song towards the end of the program a little while back, Hum Dekhenge. Iqbal Banu sang that song in Lahore in front of a very large audience soon after Ziaul Haq took over as a military dictator of Pakistan. And she sang, Hum Dekhenge, we will see. Lazim hai ki hum dekhenge. We will see, we will damn see that you are put down. That's the first word of that song. He said, we will see, we will so damn see the promised day carved on the stone of eternity. That's the opening stanza of that song. And it goes on at a later point to very inspiring stanzas. Sab taaj uchhale jayenge, sab takht giraye jayenge. We will fling all the crowns to dirt and thrash all the thrones to ground. That's the inspiration that she provides us through that song. For us to remember in today's fascistic times, which robbed us of an enormously inspiring personality like Gauri or others like Mr. Kalburgi or Govind Pansare or Narendra Dabholkar in different parts of the country. They inspire us to carry on the flag of struggle against fascism. And let's all take a pledge today that we will join hands and fascism in India will not pass. We will defeat fascism at any cost in India, and we will create a new democratic India, not simply a return to an old India, but a new democratic progressive India that all these people dreamt of. Let that be the pledge that we all take today. Friends, I am supposed to be speaking on issues in Indian federalism. And as you may have guessed, I'm an economist by training. And political scientists and others on the stage will speak about issues of federalism from different political perspectives. But I would like to stick to what I know best in my subject, which is economics. And I would like to speak about issues in fiscal federalism in India as they have emerged and they are now more topical because of the formation of the 16th Finance Commission and also different struggles waged by states for more money to be paid to them from the union government and so on. Friends, constitutionally, India is not a unitary state. Constitutionally, India is a union of states. And more politically, India is a union of nationalities. I come from Kerala. And from the school times, we have heard two lines. Bharatam enna peru kettal abhimana pooritamaganam andarangam. Keralam ennu kettalo tilakkanam chora nyarambugaliൽ. When you hear the term Bharat or India, your heart should be filled with joy. And when you hear the term Kerala, blood should boil in your veins. So, who am I? Am I an Indian or am I a Keralite? I would say I'm both. That is the dual consciousness that informs the mind of every Indian, informs the consciousness of every Indian. And when was this dual consciousness formed, or when did it emerge? It emerged during colonialism. The territory called India today, as we see today, got entrenched in the consciousness of Indian with an extraordinarily sacrificial, extraordinarily courageous struggle against colonialism, struggle against British imperialism. That is what formed the pan-Indian consciousness that informs an Indian today. But that's not the only consciousness that informs that mind. It is also a consciousness of a region, of a language, of a culture, which grew alongside this whole struggle against colonialism and imperialism, and ultimately fructified in the formation of not just the nation state of India, but also within that states which are linguistic nationalities in some sense, cultural units of their own. Who upheld this flag of dual consciousness? It was the left, progressive, communist forces of India who held this flag high. E.M.S. Namboodiripad, the first Chief Minister of Kerala and the communist leader, wrote the book Onnegal Kodi Malayaligal, 1.25 crore Malayalis, and later he rewrote that book into Keralam Malayaligalada Madhrubhumi, Keralam, the motherland of Malayalis. P. Sundaraya, the extraordinary communist leader from Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, the leader of the Telangana struggle, wrote the book Vishal Andhra. Bhavani Sen, the communist leader from West Bengal, wrote the book Nuton Bangla. What are all these books? These are all books which reaffirmed that India is not just a unitary state, but also a union of nationalities, a union of cultures, a union of languages. So every Indian has that dual consciousness, and at the top of it is the consciousness of anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism. But the idea of India that you see in the fascistic terminologies of today, in the right-wing discourses of today, is not that of anti-colonialism. They were apologists of colonialism. They were those who wrote apology letters to escape from jails of British colonialism, while others spent decades and even died in jails. And they give lectures today on the virtues of nation-state patriotism, nationalism, and so on. They are not believers in the anti-colonialist or anti-imperialist ideologies. They would like to see a replacement, a substitution of this pan-Indian consciousness informed by anti-colonial and anti-imperial struggles with a Hindutva consciousness. Can it be a substitute? No, it cannot be a substitute, because that is not India. The diversity of India does not allow for that pan-Indian consciousness to emerge on that divisive communal line. But they have tried for 60 years to push that agenda, partly succeeded also with coming to power for over a decade in India now. But they are unable to do that without force. They are unable to do that without forcing the hands of Indians to think so. That is what gives rise to authoritarianism that informs this government. That is what gives rise to the use of different forms of violence against people who dare to dress differently, who dare to eat differently, who dare to speak different languages. You have one nation, one language, one nation, one election today, one nation, one dress, one nation, one form of thinking in terms of the spiritual sort of guidance that you seek all the time. This is the India that they want to create today. Do they have any right to speak about federalism? We should unequivocally say no. They do not believe in the idea of federalism that we know in a constitutional sense, because they did not want even this constitution to be implemented in the first place. They did not want the tricolor. They wanted a saffron flag. They did not want the constitution of Baba Sahib Ambedkar. They wanted Manusmriti in its place. And they today give us lectures about patriotism. They today give us lectures on nationalism. Let me begin by giving you a flavor of what they think about federalism by quoting their ideological guru, Madhav Sadashiv Golwalkar. In 1961, Golwalkar sent a letter to the first session of the National Integration Council. A part of that letter is worth quoting here. He says, Today's federal form of government not only gives birth but also nourishes the feelings of separatism. In a way, refuses to recognize the fact of one nation and destroys it. It must be completely uprooted, constitution purified, and a unitary form of government should be established. This is Golwalkar's letter in 1961 to the National Integration Council. It also informed the RSS's view or the Janasangh's view whenever demands for unified linguistic states were raised. Shamsul Islam, in his authoritarian work on what RSS thinks about federalism, notes that it was from this ideological perspective that RSS, for example, opposed the formation of a Samyukta Maharashtra, unified Maharashtra. Golwalkar once spoke at an anti-Maharashtra formation conference and said the following: India should have central rule, and from administrative point of view, states should be administered territories. This is not enough. There's much more. Bunch of Thoughts is the Bible of this right-wing formation that we are talking about, and which presents us with a substitute for federalism. And Golwalkar wrote in this Bunch of Thoughts the following paragraph: the most important and effective step will be to bury deep for good all talk of a federal structure of our country's constitution, to sweep away the existence of all autonomous or semi-autonomous states within the one that is Bharat, and proclaim one country, one state, one legislature, one executive, with no trace of fragmentational, regional, sectarian, linguistic, or other types of pride. Let the constitution be re-examined and redrafted so as to establish this unitary form of government. This is Golwalkar in Bunch of Thoughts. They are enemies of federalism. They are enemies of diversity. They celebrate a unitary form of government which smoothens out, which kills all diversities and all forms of variations that exist in this country. And that is the context in which we are living today. And this is the reason why the agenda of a true federal India must be raised again by us very forcefully. We are going to see the emergence of a new policy agenda: one nation, one election. But this one nation, one election will not come alone in a vacuum. It will come with filling up all the seats that are lying empty in the new parliament hall, by increasing the number of seats in the parliament after a delimitation whenever the census actually happens. And with that delimitation, the number of seats or number of MPs who will go into the parliament from, say, the southern states of India, which have high levels of achievements in fertility rate reductions, is likely to fall. And the true idea of India, which was represented in the 541-member parliament from the 1950s onwards, its spirit will die. And that is an additional urgent reason why we must keep talking to people about the importance of a healthy federal system in this country's polity. So that is the context in which we are talking in this platform today. But coming back to what I said I'm going to speak on, the questions of fiscal federalism in India. And that is just one aspect of the crisis that I'm talking about. I'm speaking only about it because that's the part I know better than the other parts. I'm sure others will amplify on other aspects of the problem. Friends, the problem of fiscal federalism in India, the financial or economic relationship between the center and the states, is not something new. There are at least three phases or three periods in which or through which this crisis has traveled in some sense. We had the Constitution of India coming into force from 1950. At that time itself, there were different kinds of dissenting voices being raised, primarily because that constitution had drawn enormously from the Government of India Act of 1935, which was an effort by the British colonial state to unify the provinces of this country. So borrowing a lot from the Government of India Act of 1935 meant that borrowing a lot of colonial spirits also into the constitution. And even though the constitution came out to be an extremely progressive document, it remained a fact, as according to many scholars of public finance, that with respect to fiscal federalism, the constitution remained in some sense, some call it quasi-federal, some call it federal in intent but not in reality, and so on. And this was primarily because of 3 or 4 important problems that existed. I'm trying to sort of historicize it in this form because we must not think that the crisis is new. It is new, but it is also something that has been with us for a while. The problem here was that large number of taxes were collected by the center, but a large number of expenditures were to be incurred at the state level. So there has to be a relationship between the center and the states. Center collects a lot of money, the states have to spend a lot of money. So who will decide, or how will this transfer of resources from union to the states be determined? Constitution saw a way, which was the Finance Commission. So the Finance Commission would be set up for every 5 years. This Finance Commission will decide 2 things. One, of all the taxes that are collected, how much will the union keep and how much will be given to all states? That's called the the problem of vertical balance in federalism. Then comes the horizontal problem, which is that of all the money that is to be given to the states, how much will each state get? How much will Karnataka get, Tamil Nadu get, UP get, Assam get, and so on and so forth. So these 2 issues were to be decided by the Finance Commission. That was a constitutional provision. But unfortunately, because we had entered into planning in a big way, we had the Planning Commission also at that time. The Planning Commission's job was very important. It had to decide investment priorities, developmental priorities, ensure that resources are ensured for those purposes, and so on. But the way fiscal federalism emerged in India, it turned out that the Planning Commission, which was not necessarily a constitutional body, ended up getting more powers than the Finance Commission. So the Finance Commission essentially dealt only with non-plan expenditures in practice, but the Planning Commission dealt with the plan expenditures of this country. This division does not exist today in many states, but Planning Commission essentially became a body which was not in the Constitution, but was there to decide on how much center will give to the states for different purposes. So this was one important matter of tension. Planning Commission was a body with a function, but was it sort of conflicting with the role of the Finance Commission was the first question that was raised. The second question that was raised was, apart from the taxes that are shared with the states, the center also provided a number of discretionary grants to states. Discretionary grants, for example, central sector schemes. Now, there is no formula or criterion that determines how much will go from the center to the states for each central sector scheme. That's precisely the reason why it is a discretionary grant. So this discretionary grant meant that the center could transfer funds to states outside the Finance Commission recommendations, informed by a political perspective. And that became a second important source of tension between center and the states, more so because many of these central sector schemes were used by the central governments from time to time to intrude into, to violate the state list and the concurrent list of the Constitution, and to usurp the different functions of state governments listed in the state list. So that became a second important source of concern. The third important source of concern was related to the different loans that the center provided to the states. Article 293. Article 293 is not governed by the Finance Commission. It's outside the transfers of the Finance Commission. As a result, the center used to give a lot of loans to states, and these also were in many forms politically determined. And to add to it, in many cases, the relationship between center and the states turned into a creditor-debtor relationship rather than a relationship of equals. This was the third tension. The fourth tension was minor, but it was important nevertheless, different gap-filling expenditures that the center gave to the states. This also was politically determined in different ways. So for all these reasons, what you have is from the 1950s onwards, till about the 1980s or so, the system of fiscal federalism was under stress. There were no major violations of the sort that we see today, but still complaints that states had on multiple fronts, which led to the formation of the Sarkaria Commission, etc., in the 1980s and so on, which was a culmination of all those complaints. So that is phase one that we are talking about. But the second phase begins from the 1980s onwards into the 1990s, when the period of economic liberalization begins. Often, this role of economic liberalization in creating centralization in the center-state fiscal relations is not quite appreciated that much. It had a very important role to play in that. So to begin with, if you look at the early 1980s, most states of India were revenue surplus in their budgets. When I was in school, I used to see newspapers in the morning when budgets used to come. Karnataka or Kerala or Tamil Nadu have revenue surplus of these many crores. That was the news. But today you see fiscal deficit is this much, revenue deficit is that much. Revenue deficit of states was not heard of at all by the early till the early 1980s. That began to emerge from the mid-80s and later into the 1990s, when, to begin with, the central government began to liberalize interest rates as part of financial liberalization exercises. So the interest rates went up sharply. For what? Loans borrowed by the states, but not for the loans borrowed by the center. On an average, by the early 1990s, if the average interest rate for loans of the states was above 10%, the average interest rate of loans borrowed by the center was less than 7%. To add to it, you also had the facility of monetizing deficits through the Reserve Bank. The states did not have it, but the center had it. So in other words, 1980s, because interest rates went up, the states, which already were having some amount of debt with them, they slowly moved into a period of debt crisis. And revenue surpluses slowly, universally began to turn into revenue deficits. So 1980s, late 80s, early 90s, with liberalization comes, interest rate deregulation happens, you basically have a situation where the debt burden of states increase, they enter into a revenue deficit, and their dependence on the center, either for a loan waiver or for some other kind of extra assistance, additional assistance, that question begins to come up, which was not quite heard of in the 50s, 60s, or 70s. So a new age of dependence of the states on the center essentially begins. Come the 1990s, liberalization progresses. You have a new ideological issue that comes up, which is that under the neoliberal policies of economic liberalization, you want to keep fiscal deficits low. You want to keep borrowing levels low. Why should you keep fiscal deficits low? Apart from the ideology of fiscal conservatism that informs neoliberalism, you also, nobody's looking at me. I'm worried. Yeah, so essentially, the ideology of neoliberalism promotes an era of fiscal conservatism. This is primarily, this has a global dimension as well as a domestic dimension. And the global dimension is that you now live in an era of free, mobile finance capital. Finance capital travels from country to country for quick profits, as hot money travels in speculative terms. So they want to make quick profits today in one country, move on to another country, move on to a third country, and so on. And in this process, they look for profits. They also look for stability of the country into which they are entering. And one of the important indicators of stability of the country that they think of entering into is the fiscal deficit. Is the fiscal deficit low? Then it is supposed to be a safe and secure country to take your capital to. So it became imperative on the part of the dependent Union Government of India to also follow suit and say that we will keep fiscal deficits low in order to keep international finance capital happy. In order to attract more such capital into the country, we will keep fiscal deficits low. What did this essentially do? This essentially meant that Indian state was never good at collecting taxes. That is well known. Well known then, well known now. So you have one source of revenue for the government of India closed, more or less. What is the other source? Borrowing. That is the only other source for which the government could raise revenues and spend for people in education, health, or different other welfare activities. But with the fiscal deficit attaining an ideological importance in this form that I just mentioned, the central government stopped borrowing also, beyond a point. Because fiscal deficit had now to be kept at 3% of the GDP. So fiscal responsibility legislations were passed at the center, and not just that, states were also told that you will not be eligible for grants from the center unless you pass your own fiscal responsibility legislations in the state assemblies also. So every state was forced by the center to pass legislations to keep their fiscal deficits at 3% of their gross state domestic product, GSDP, every year. And this was monitored by the center from year to year. This meant that states also cannot anymore borrow and spend. So states are already in debt crisis. Now they have a problem of not being able to borrow more also for any purposes. Interest rates are high also. So this meant that the center was tying the hands of the state or state governments, which were elected democratic bodies to serve the citizens of each state. They were not in a position anymore to spend for their people, for their voters, their citizens, because their hands were fiscally tied by the central government through the fiscal responsibility legislations. This continues to be today. As you will know, Kerala government has approached the Supreme Court to challenge this, whether such a sort of center can do this kind of impose this kind of a fiscal constraint on state governments or not. Now that case will be heard now by a constitutional bench. It has not been escalated to that level. We will know in a few years what the result of that would be. But this essentially tied the hands of the state governments from any form of spending. Now this was another form of important of some importance. Later, finance commissions were also told that when you recommend, you also should say that these limits to borrowing as part of fiscal responsibility legislations must be highlighted in your recommendations. And they did so. So this was the second phase that I'm talking about, a phase of liberalization. Slowly, where states entered into debt crisis, became even more dependent on the central government, plus their hands were fiscally tied by the central government through these legislations. Now we come to the third phase, which is the phase of post-2014. Post-2014 phase opens up a new era of crisis in fiscal federalism in India. It was already bad, it became worse, so to say. To begin with, the Planning Commission was dismantled. And you had the Niti Aayog coming over. What happened as a result of this? Planning Commission had its problems. Everybody had some problems and complaints with the Planning Commission. But at least the Planning Commission decided on how much to transfer plan expenditure to states based on some formula. It was a rule-based transfer. You could complain with the rule, but there was a rule-based transfer out there. First, it was the Gadgil committee report, Gadgil formula, then it became the Mukherjee formula. All those formulas were used to give. So if states had a problem, you could actually go to the Planning Commission and make a representation. The Planning Commission traveled to each state capital and discussed with chief ministers before every annual plan. All these sort of interactions happened between center and states. All that was shut down with the dismantling of the Planning Commission. Along with that, there was a National Development Council of Chief Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. That was also made defunct. National Development Council is now the governing body of Niti Aayog, and nobody even goes there. Now, Niti Aayog's, what is Niti Aayog? It is nothing as compared to the Planning Commission. It is just another government department. If Planning Commission decided on how much will be given to states and so on, this Niti Aayog is under the mercy of the Finance Minister for their annual allocations. That is the situation. So what happens to all the plan expenditure that was earlier decided by the Planning Commission? All of that was transferred to not the Niti Aayog, but the Ministry of Finance. And the Minister of Finance, the political agents sitting there, and the Babus sitting there, without resorting to any formula, any rule, decide on how much states should get in form of different grants outside the Finance Commission. So what has happened is, from what the Planning Commission decided as plan expenditures, how much, for example, each state which will get in NREGA or in terms of every central sector scheme or centrally sponsored scheme that we know of today, is now a political decision of the Ministry of Finance. That is the first major blow to federalism or fiscal federalism that happened after 2014. So Planning Commission is gone, Niti Aayog has come, and all the responsibilities go to the Ministry of Finance, which are now political decisions. Second is what? Central sector schemes and centrally sponsored schemes are there outside the Finance Commission grants. What happens to all these centrally sponsored schemes? Center used to give 90 rupees and the states used to put 10 rupees. 90-10 was the ratio earlier. But with this new government coming into power, that became 60-40. Center will put only 60, states will have to put 40. The second important weakening of the system of federalism that we had came in. Now, this coincided, incidentally, with a report of the 14th Finance Commission, chaired by Dr. Y.V. Reddy, which said that of all the taxes that you collect, you earlier used to give 32% to the states, now you must give 42% to the states. That was the recommendation of the 14th Finance Commission of Dr. Y.V. Reddy. And that was the year in which this NDA-1 government, that is first Narendra Modi government, took power. And it is now videographically shown that Mr. Modi requested a meeting with Mr. Y.V. Reddy and requested him to bring down the share of states from 42% to somewhere between 32 and 42%. The man of integrity that he was, Dr. Reddy refused. This is recounted knowingly or unknowingly by Mr. BVR Subramaniam in a video recording, which is available in the Reporters Collective. And this is no Prime Minister has ever spoken to a Finance Commission chairperson in this form earlier. This is a direct intervention that the Prime Minister made. The Indian media, the mainstream media has shut this news down, but if you want to read it, it's available there. So this became a very important issue for the union government. Now it has to give 42% to the states from the taxes. Now, how will it handle its own expenditures? You need to have PM this Yojana, PM that Yojana, and so on. How will you finance them? They found a very interesting way, which is constitutionally valid, by the way, but completely dilutes the spirit of fiscal federalism. They decided to increase cesses and surcharges. On everything you pay a cess now. Education cess, health cess, sort of road cess, infrastructure cess, agriculture cess, Krishi Kalyan cess, Swachh Bharat cess. For everything you pay a cess. Some die with some time, but some continue. Do you know the reason why the central government decided to increase the number of cesses and surcharges like this? Because cesses and surcharges do not fall under that band of taxes which have to be devolved to the states. They don't have to be shared with the states constitutionally. They can be kept 100% by the center without sharing with the states. So they decided to increase cesses and surcharges and keep all the money to themselves. And how much money was it? Between 2015 and 2024-25, 10 years of the Narendra Modi government, the total amount collected as cesses and surcharges, that is not shared with the states, was rupees 36 lakh crore. Rupees 36 lakh crore rupees was collected as cesses and surcharges and not shared, and not a paisa was shared with the states. It is this attack on fiscal federalism that has essentially financed the creation of that political animal which all journalists talk about, called the Labharti Varg. Where did the Labharti Varg get created from? The Labharti Varg got created from different PM-schemes. And where did the money for all these schemes come from? From cesses and surcharges. Otherwise, you don't have any money. You actually cut the corporate tax rates from 30% to 22%. You're not raising your fiscal deficit to raise more borrowings from the market. Then how do you get more money to spend on different schemes like this? It is through the collection of more cesses and surcharges. This became a new form of centralizing expenditure responsibilities in the hands of the central government after 2014. So this became a new form of attack on federalism during this time. And these yojanas that you see are another form of attack on federalism for a different reason also. Look at schemes like Prime Minister's Fasal Bima Yojana. 6 to 8 states have walked out of that scheme. They are saying we don't want to be part of this scheme because these guidelines don't suit us. All of these schemes have one-size-fits-all guidelines for the national level. They are not suitable for states. Right? Ayushman Bharat scheme. Now, every family health center, it's actually a scheme that is actually copied from Kerala, because it had this public health centers transformed into family health centers in 2016. This idea was copied by the central government, made into an Ayushman Bharat scheme, and they said all such buildings that you create under this scheme should be called Ayushman Bharat Mandir. Why Mandir? Obviously, the reason is very clear. It certainly won't be called a masjid or anything, but why do you call it a mandir? So many states said, no, we don't want this. We don't want to call it a mandir. We have our own names. We have these buildings for a long time. We will fund it on our own and we will name it on our own. And then, no, you will not get this money unless you do 2 things or you do 3 things. One is you name them Ayushman Bharat Mandir and you write them in big letters outside. Even the font size is given. Number 2, you paint them with a yellow or blue, I forget the color. A particular color paint should be used to paint them for uniformity in terms of branding. And third, the Prime Minister's photograph should also be there. Right? Now, let me give you a third example which will boil your blood even more. There is a scheme called Life Mission in Kerala, which basically aims at making Kerala homeless free in 3 to 4 years. There should be no homeless household in Kerala by 2026. This Life Mission takes some money from the Prime Minister's Awas Yojana. Prime Minister's Awas Yojana rural for one house gives rupees 75,000. Now, with 75,000, you can't build the door of a toilet in Kerala, right? So what do? The state government comes in and says, we are putting 3.5 lakhs into the kitty. So 3.5 lakhs from the state government and 75,000 rupees from the central government are brought together and a house is built. Now boss says, mera photo lagao. You give 75,000 rupees out of 4 to 4.5 lakhs, you have the audacity to demand that I need my photo there. Similarly is the case with Prime Minister's Awas Yojana Urban. 1.25 lakhs is what central government gives. State government puts 2.5 lakhs, yet he wants the photo there. Why should states agree to this? States have said no. So this has become a new problem that we have. I'm sure this is, in Karnataka, there is a similar problem of this kind, which I am not closely aware of, but I'm sure you all are likely to know of similar such schemes. So this is one, so these are new forms of attacks that you see on fiscal federalism in India. This is primarily to create the aura of a supreme leader, the aura of an authoritarian, all-encompassing central government, which is welfare-oriented, which is the friend of people. It is to create such a political narrative that this attack on fiscal federalism, or the soul of the Indian Constitution, is being carried out. It is a political fight. This is a political fight that we have to wage. And as you all will agree with me, Karnataka is an equally relevant sufferer in this story, because the 15th Finance Commission recommended a grant to Karnataka, and the central government rejected that advice or recommendation of the 15th Finance Commission, and Karnataka has lost a few thousand crores as grants from the Finance Commission as a result. So every state has a grievance. On the 12th of this month, finance ministers of all states of South India are meeting in the city of Trivandrum to discuss how this can be addressed, this can be approached. I understand that the Finance Commission is probably currently now in Bangalore and having discussions. I read the speech of the Chief Minister of Karnataka today morning. So this is a joint fight to protect India's federal structure. And the fight to protect the fiscal federal structure is a very important part of protecting and nurturing and developing what I called as the soul of the Indian polity, which is diversity. And that diversity is embedded in the idea of federalism that the Constitution has envisaged, and fiscal federalism is a very important part of that idea of federalism that we are talking about. And I hope that the memories of Gauri, the memories of Govind Pansare, the memories of Kalburgi, the memories of Dabolkar, all these martyrs of this fight against this authoritarian regime, they all will inspire us to join hands and to fight against this kind of attack on Indian Constitution and Indian polity itself in a big way.